I am 74 years old. For 51 years, I have shared a life of predictable rhythms and comfortable silences with my husband, George. George is 76. He is a retired civil engineer who still organizes his spice rack alphabetically. He is the last person on earth I would ever suspect of having a secret. But one afternoon, while searching for a heavy book to press some flowers, I found a crisp, white envelope. It was tucked inside an old engineering textbook in the very back of the hallway closet. When I opened it, my world tilted on its axis. It was a bank statement for an account in George's name only, an account I never knew existed. The balance was over $75,000. The deposits were regular, dating back 15 years. I sat on the floor, my mind spinning a web of betrayal. Why would a man who asks me for the Netflix password hide $75,000 in another city? I imagined another family. I imagined a secret life. In that moment, I was ready to burn 51 years of history to the ground. But before I tell you what happened when I finally confronted George with that paper, I would love to know where you are joining us from today. Please leave a comment and let me know your city or state. It is so wonderful to see our community grow. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon, the kind of afternoon that usually feels safe and predictable. The sun was leaning low over our backyard in the suburbs, casting long, golden shadows across the patio. I had spent the morning tending to my garden. I had clipped a few of my prize-winning tea roses, the deep red ones that George always says remind him of our first date in 1973. I wanted to preserve them. I wanted to press them inside a heavy book so I could tuck them into a card for our granddaughter's graduation. I am 74 years old now, and I have learned that it is the small memories that matter the most. I walked to the hallway closet. It is a narrow space, smelling of cedar wood and old winter coats. This is where George keeps his history. George is 76, and he was a meticulous structural engineer for over 40 years. Even in retirement. He keeps his old textbooks organized. He says they are the foundation of everything he has built. I reached for the top shelf. My fingers brushed against a thick, dusty volume. The title was embossed in faded gold letters. Structural Engineering for Foundations. It was heavy. It was solid. It was exactly what I needed to flatten the delicate petals of my roses. I pulled the book down, resting it on my lap as I sat on the small wooden bench in the hallway. The weight of it felt familiar. It felt like George, sturdy, reliable, and perhaps a bit dry. But as the book fell open to a chapter on reinforced concrete, something slid out from between the pages. It was not a bookmark. It was not an old receipt. It was a crisp, white envelope. I stared at it for a long moment. My heart gave a strange little thump, a tiny warning sign that I did not yet understand. The envelope looked brand new. It was clean. It was pristine. It did not belong in a textbook that had not been opened in a decade. There was no writing on the front, no name, no address. Just a sealed flap, holding something inside. In our 51 years of marriage, George and I have never had his and hers things. We share a bank account. We share a Netflix password. We even share a plate of fries when we go out to the local diner. We do not have secrets, or at least, that is what I had told myself every morning for half a century. I hesitated. My thumb brushed the edge of the paper. A part of me wanted to put it back, to pretend I had never seen it, and go back to my roses. But curiosity is a persistent thing. It whispers in the silence. I slid my finger under the flap. The sound of the paper tearing felt incredibly loud in the empty house. It felt like a breaking point. I pulled out the document inside, and as I unfolded the pages, the air seemed to leave the room. My name is Martha. I have known my husband since we were 20 years old. But as I looked at the bold letters on that statement, I realized that I might not know the man sleeping beside me at all. I sat there, on the cold, hard floor of the hallway closet, The heavy engineering textbook was still resting on my lap, but I no longer felt its weight. All I could feel was the thin, crisp paper of the bank statement between my fingers. My hands were shaking. Not a violent shake, but a steady, rhythmic tremor that I could not stop. I looked at the top of the page. The logo was for a place called the First National Bank of Oak Ridge. Oak Ridge. That was a small, quiet town, nearly 3 hours away from our home. We had no reason to have business there. We had no family there. We had not even driven through that town in years. And yet, here it was. An account. A secret account. And it was in George's name only. My eyes blurred as I tried to focus on the numbers. I blinked. Once. Twice. Until the black ink became sharp against the white background. The balance was $75,422. $75,000. To some. In this modern world, that might seem like a small amount. But to a couple like us, two people who lived on a fixed pension and Social Security, $75,000 was a fortune. It was a house. It was a decade of security. It was a life. I began to look at the transaction history. My heart hammered against my ribs. A dull, aching thud. The deposits were made every single month, without fail, for 15 years. 15 long years. I started to do the math in my head. 15 years. That meant this started back in 2009. I tried to remember what our lives were like back then. We were younger. We were still grieving. Deeply. For our daughter, Emily. We were trying to find our footing in a world that felt empty without her. During those 15 years, we had watched our pennies. I remembered the times I had put back a more expensive brand of coffee at the grocery store to save $2. I remembered the year our furnace broke, and we sat under heavy wool blankets for 3 weeks because we weren't sure if we could afford the repairs right away. George had always been so careful. He was the one who checked the tires for the best fuel efficiency. He was the one who spent hours comparing insurance rates to save us $20 a month. And all that time, while I was clipping coupons and turning off lights to save on the electric bill, he was putting money away, hundreds of dollars every month, into a secret account, in a secret town, for a secret reason. The betrayal felt like a cold stone in my stomach. It was heavy. It was freezing. I looked at the dates again. 15 years of monthly deposits. That is 180 times he walked into a bank, or sat at a computer, and moved money away from our shared life. 180 times he chose to keep a secret from me. Why Oak Ridge? Why a town 3 hours away? The questions began to pile up like dead leaves in autumn. I looked around the closet. This space, which had always felt like a sanctuary of old memories, now felt like a room full of lies. The smell of cedar, which I usually loved, now felt suffocating. I thought about our joint bank account, the one we had shared since our wedding day in 1973. We had always been honest about money. Or, I thought we had. I knew exactly how much was in our savings. I knew the balance of our checking account to the cent. But I did not know about $75,000. I felt a sudden, sharp pang of humiliation. I felt foolish. I was the wife who trusted. I was the woman who believed that after 50 years, there were no stones left unturned. I thought I knew the map of George's heart, every trail, every valley, every peak. But it turns out, there was a whole territory I had never seen. I folded the paper back up, very slowly. I tucked it into the envelope. I placed the envelope back into the engineering textbook. At page 342, I closed the book. I stood up, my knees popping in the silence of the hallway. I felt old, older than 74. I felt as though the foundation of my life had just shifted 6 inches to the left, and everything was about to collapse. I walked to the kitchen and put the kettle on. I needed tea. I needed something hot to melt the ice that was forming in my chest. As I waited for the water to boil, I looked out the window at George. He was in the backyard. He was wearing his old, stained denim overalls and a straw hat. He was carefully, methodically, weeding the vegetable garden. He looked so innocent. He looked like the man I had loved for half a century. But as I watched him, I realized I was looking at a stranger. A stranger with $75,000 and a secret that had been growing in the dark for 15 years. The next 3 days were the longest of my life. I moved through the house like a ghost. I cooked breakfast. I folded the laundry. I dusted the picture frames on the mantel. But I was not really there. I was trapped inside my own head, spinning a web of dark, terrible thoughts. I kept watching George. I became an observer, a detective in my own home. I watched him eat his oatmeal in the morning. He always adds exactly 12 blueberries. Not 11, not 13, 12. He is a man of meticulous habits. I used to find that comforting. I used to think it meant he was stable, reliable, a man who could never hide anything because he was too honest for his own good. But now, that same meticulous nature terrified me. If a man can be that disciplined about his blueberries, how disciplined can he be about a lie? I sat across from him at the small kitchen table, sipping my coffee, searching his face for a sign. A twitch of the eye, a hesitation in his voice. Anything. The roses are looking good this year, Martha, he said. His voice was calm. It was the same voice that had comforted me when I lost my mother, the same voice that had whispered I love you every night for 5 decades. Yes, I replied. My voice sounded thin, like a piece of paper about to tear. They are. Is something wrong? He asked, tilting his head slightly. You seem quiet today. I looked down at my mug. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the bank statement on the table and demand to know the truth. But I couldn't. Not yet. I wasn't ready for the answer. I wasn't ready for the world to end. Just a bit of a headache. George, I lied. It was the first time I had lied to him in years. It felt bitter in my mouth. You should rest, he said kindly. I'll take care of the dishes. I walked into the living room and sat in my armchair. I looked at the photograph of our daughter, Emily, on the side table. She was smiling, her hair wind-blown from a trip to the coast. We lost her 15 years ago. 15 years. The number hit me like a physical blow. The secret account started 15 years ago. The same year, we buried our only child. My mind began to go to dark, ugly places. Did he have someone else? Did the grief of losing Emily drive him into the arms of another woman? I began to imagine the other woman. I gave her a face. I gave her a name. I imagined her living in that town, Oak Ridge. I imagined George driving there on the days he said he was going to the hardware store or visiting old colleagues. Maybe there was a child. A secret child. A 15-year-old boy or girl who had George's eyes. A child who was being supported by that $75,000 while I was saving pennies on generic laundry detergent. The thought made me feel sick. I felt a surge of anger that was so hot. It made my skin prickle. I had given this man my youth. I had given him my heart. I had stood by him through every storm, every illness, every sorrow. I thought about our life. Was any of it real? When he held me while I cried for Emily, was he thinking about someone else? When he took me out for our anniversary dinner, was he calculating how much he had to deposit into the secret account the next day? I found myself looking up the number for a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. I remembered a man I had known in college, David. He had gone into family law. He lived in the city now. I found his office number on the computer while George was out in the garage. I stared at the 10 digits on the screen. My finger hovered over the keys. If I called that number, it was over. 51 years of marriage. A lifetime of memories. Our home, our garden, our shared history, all of it would be burned to the ground. I thought about the silent generation values I was raised with. You don't walk away, you endure. You fix what is broken. But how do you fix a lie that is 15 years old? How do you repair a heart that has been systematically deceived for over 5,000 days? I didn't call. Not yet. That night, I watched him sleep. The moonlight was filtering through the curtains, casting a silvery glow over his face. He looked so peaceful. He looked like the man I had trusted with my soul. I realized then that a marriage isn't just a contract. It is a fragile, living thing. And I felt like I was holding the dead remains of myself in my hands. I spent the next 2 days in a state of quiet devastation. I didn't eat much. I didn't sleep. I just watched. I watched the man I thought I knew. And I waited for the moment when I would finally have the courage to ask, "George, who have you been giving our life to?" The silence in the house felt like a heavy, suffocating blanket. And I knew, deep down, that once the secret was out, nothing would ever be the same again. The sun rose over the hills of our small town, just like it had for the last 50 years. It filtered through the lace curtains in the kitchen, casting patterned shadows on the linoleum floor. But for me, Martha, the light felt different. It felt cold. It felt like it was exposing a secret that had been hidden in the corners of our home for far too long. We had lived in this house for 5 decades. Every creak in the floorboards was a familiar friend. Every stain on the counter had a story. But as I sat at the small round table, clutching a mug of coffee that had gone cold, I realized I did not know the man sitting across from me at all. George. My George. He was sitting there, as he always did, in his favorite flannel shirt, the one with the frayed cuffs. He was eating his bowl of steel-cut oats. I watched him lift the spoon. I watched his hand tremble just a little bit, a sign of his 74 years. He added a splash of milk and exactly 2 teaspoons of brown sugar. Usually, this sight brought me comfort. It was the rhythm of our lives. It was the steady beat of a long marriage. But today, every sound he made felt like a hammer hitting a nail. The scrape of the spoon against the ceramic bowl, the way he cleared his throat, the sound of him turning the page of the morning newspaper. I watched him. I watched him closely. I looked at his face, the lines around his eyes that I used to think were from laughing with me. Now, I wondered if they were lines from years of keeping things hidden. He looked like George. He sounded like George. But to me, he was a stranger, a ghost. For 3 days we had not spoken a single word. 3 days. 72 hours of a silence so heavy, it felt like it was pressing the air out of my lungs. George didn't ask why I wasn't talking. Perhaps he knew. Or perhaps he was too afraid to ask. He just went about his business. He acted as if nothing was wrong. He acted as if our world hadn't just tilted on its axis. After breakfast, George stood up. He rinsed his bowl in the sink. He was careful. Always so careful. He dried it with the yellow dish towel and placed it back in the cupboard. Then, he put on his old canvas jacket and his wide-brimmed hat. "I will be in the garden," he said softly. He didn't look at me. He looked at the floor. He looked at the door. He looked at anything but my eyes. I followed him to the window. I stood behind the curtain, watching him walk out to the rose bushes. Those roses were his pride and joy. He had planted them 30 years ago for our anniversary. He called them Martha's jewels. I watched him take out his pruning shears. He moved with a slow, practiced grace. He snipped a dead leaf here. He trimmed a stray branch there. He looked so peaceful. He looked like a good man, a kindman. But I knew the truth now. I felt a sharp pain in my chest. It wasn't a heart attack, though sometimes I wished it were. It would be easier than this. It was the pain of betrayal. It was the realization that my life was built on a foundation of sand. I remembered the letters I had found, the bank statements, the names I didn't recognize. For over 10 years, George had been leading a double life. 10 years. That is 3,650 days of lying. How could he do it? How could he look at me every morning across this table and not say a word? How could he kiss my cheek and tell me he loved me while he was sending our retirement money to someone else? 51 years of marriage. We had raised 3 children. We had buried my parents. We had celebrated birthdays and survived the lean years when the factory closed down. I thought we were a team. I thought we were one person split into 2 bodies. I was wrong. I sat back down at the table. The silence of the house was deafening. I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Tick, 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 tick. Each second was a reminder of the time I had lost. I thought about the money. We weren't wealthy people. We were comfortable. We had worked hard, saved our pennies, and looked forward to our golden years. We had planned to travel to the Grand Canyon. We wanted to see the Pacific Ocean one last time. Now the bank account was nearly empty. Thousands of dollars. Gone. George came back inside around noon. He smelled like damp earth and rose petals. He took off his hat and wiped his forehead. "Would you like some lunch, Martha?" he asked. His voice was thin. It wavered. I didn't answer. I just looked at him. I looked at the man I had shared a bed with for half a century. I realized I was mourning him. I was mourning the man I thought he was. That man was dead. The man standing in my kitchen was a thief. A liar. He waited for a moment, his hand resting on the back of the chair. When I didn't speak, he sighed. It was a long, tired sigh. He went to the fridge and made himself a ham sandwich. He ate it standing up by the counter. He looked so lonely. For a second, just a tiny second, I felt a pang of pity for him. But then I remembered the numbers on those bank statements. I remembered the dates. I remembered the secret phone calls he thought I didn't hear. The pity turned back into ice. I got up and walked out of the room. I went upstairs to our bedroom and locked the door. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wedding photo on the dresser. We were so young. I was wearing a white lace dress. He was in a borrowed suit. We looked so happy. We looked so sure of the future. I stayed in that room for the rest of the day. I didn't cry. I was past crying. I was just empty. The silence continued into the night. We lay in the same bed, but we were miles apart. I stayed on my side, near the edge. He stayed on his. I listened to his breathing. It was steady. How could he sleep? How could he close his eyes and find rest? The 3rd day was the hardest. The silence had become a physical thing. It was like a thick fog that had filled every room. I couldn't escape it. I watched him again that morning. He was back at the roses. He was talking to them. He was whispering to the flowers, as if they were his only friends. Maybe they were. I realized then that I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't live in a house of ghosts. I couldn't live with a man who had stolen my security and my trust. I looked at my hands. They were wrinkled. They were old, but they were still strong. I had more life left in me, and I wouldn't spend it in this silence. The 3 days were over. The silence was about to break, and when it did, nothing would ever be the same again. The air in the house felt thin, like the oxygen was slowly being sucked out of the rooms. I sat at my small mahogany desk in the corner of the living room. This desk was where I wrote Christmas cards. This was where I kept the recipes for my grandmother's apple pie. Now, it was where I would decide the rest of my life. I had the yellow pages open. It felt like an artifact from a different century. My fingers traced the columns of names. Lawyers, attorneys, legal services. My heart was racing. It felt like a small bird trapped in a cage, fluttering its wings against my ribs. 51 years. I kept saying that number over and over in my head. 51. It was more than a number. It was a lifetime. It was 2 houses, 3 children, 6 grandchildren, and 1,000 Sunday dinners. It was the memories of holding his hand during the difficult times. It was the memory of him holding me when my mother passed away. But then I thought about the other number. 10. 10 years of deception. 10 years of him taking our hard-earned savings and giving it to a woman in another state. A woman he had met online. A woman who probably didn't even know his middle name. He had sent her over $60,000. $60,000. In our world, that was a fortune. That was our safety net. That was the money for the assisted living home we might need one day. That was the legacy we wanted to leave for our kids. He had traded our future for a fantasy. I picked up the phone. It was an old-fashioned landline. I liked the weight of it in my hand. I dialed the number for a man named Robert Miller. The ad said he specialized in family law. The phone rang. Once. Twice. 3 times. Miller and Associates. How can I help you? A young woman asked. My throat felt dry. I tried to speak, but no sound came out. Hello? The woman asked again. I cleared my throat. Yes, I whispered. My name is Martha Benson. I need to speak with a lawyer about a divorce. The word felt like a hot coal in my mouth. Divorce. I had never imagined I would say that word. In my generation, you didn't get divorced. You fixed things. You endured. You stayed together until the very end. One moment. Mrs. Benson, the secretary said. Her voice was kind. It didn't have any judgment in it. As I waited on hold, I looked out the window. George was out there again. He was sitting on the porch swing. He wasn't swinging. He was just sitting. He looked small. He looked like an old man who had lost his way. I felt a surge of anger. It was a hot, bubbling anger that started in my stomach and rose to my throat. He didn't get to look sad. He didn't get to be the victim. He had made his choices. He had sat at this very desk and pressed send on those bank transfers. This is Robert Miller, a deep, calm voice said. Mr. Miller, I said. My voice was stronger now. I am 72 years old. I have been married for 51 years. And I want to end it. I told him the story. I told him about the letters. I told him about the empty bank accounts. I told him about the silence that had taken over our home. He listened. He didn't interrupt. When I was finished, he spoke softly. Mrs. Benson, he said, I am very sorry. This is a difficult situation, but you have rights. Even after 51 years, you deserve to be safe. You deserve to be respected. He told me what the process would look like. He talked about the house. He talked about the remaining assets. He talked about alimony and division of property. It sounded so cold, so clinical. Our entire life was being reduced to a list of items to be split in half. The blue sofa. Who would get the blue sofa? The silver spoons from my mother. I would keep those. The house. Would we have to sell the house? The thought of leaving this home made me tremble. I loved the way the sun hit the kitchen in the morning. I loved the garden, even if George was the one who tended it. This was my sanctuary. But I realized that a house is just wood and bricks. A home is built on trust. And the trust was gone. The home had already collapsed. I was just standing in the ruins. I want to move forward, I told the lawyer. I want the papers drawn up. Are you sure, Martha? He asked. I looked at the wedding photo on the dresser one last time. I'm sure, I said. I hung up the phone. I felt a strange sense of peace. It was a sad peace, but it was a peace nonetheless. The decision was made. The weight of the secret was no longer just mine to carry. I stood up and walked to the kitchen. George was coming inside. He was carrying a single red rose. He had trimmed the thorns off. He held it out to me. For you, Martha, he said. His eyes were pleading. He was trying to bridge the gap. He was trying to use a flower to fix a decade of lies. I didn't take the rose. George, I said. My voice was steady. I called a lawyer today. He froze. The color drained from his face. The rose trembled in his hand. A lawyer? He whispered. Yes, I said. I know about the money. I know about the woman. I know everything, George. He dropped the rose. It hit the floor with a soft thud. He didn't try to deny it. He didn't make excuses. He just stood there, looking at me, and he began to cry. He cried like a child. He slumped into a kitchen chair and buried his face in his hands. I'm sorry, Martha, he sobbed. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for it to go so far. I was lonely. I felt old. I just wanted someone to talk to. You had me, I said. You had me for 51 years. I was right here. I know, he choked out. I know. I looked at him, and for the first time in 3 days, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I just felt finished. The papers will be here next week, I said. I walked past him. I walked out of the kitchen. I walked toward the rest of my life. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. It was the most painful decision of my life. But as I walked up the stairs, I realized I was breathing again. The silence was gone. The truth was out. I was 72 years old, and for the first time in a long time I was free. The house was quiet, but it was not the kind of quiet that brings peace. It was the kind of quiet that feels heavy, like the air right before a summer storm breaks over the plains. Thursday night had always been our routine night. We would have dinner, usually something simple like pot roast or roasted chicken, and then we would sit in the living room. George would read the paper, and I would work on my knitting. It was a rhythm we had perfected over 40 years of marriage. 40 years. That is 4 decades of sharing a bed, a table, and a life. But that night, the pot roast tasted like cardboard in my mouth. I could hardly swallow. My stomach felt like it was tied in 100 tight knots. Every time the grandfather clock in the hallway chimed, the sound echoed through my chest. I kept thinking about the envelope hidden in my apron pocket. It was just a piece of paper, a bank statement from our joint account. But it felt as heavy as a lead weight. I waited until the dishes were cleared. I waited until the kitchen was spotless and the yellow light above the dining table was the only thing illuminating the room. George was sitting there, sipping his decaf coffee. He looked so normal. He looked like the man I had loved since we were 20 years old. But the numbers on that paper told a different story. They told a story of secrets. They told a story of $3,000 withdrawn in small amounts over the last 6 months. $3,000. It was a fortune to us, living on a fixed income. I walked over to the table. My legs felt weak, like they might give out at any moment. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the folded paper. I laid it down on the lace tablecloth, right between his coffee cup and his hand. I didn't say anything at first. I just watched his eyes. I saw the moment he realized what it was. His hand froze. He didn't pull away, but he went very, very still. The yellow light cast long shadows across the deep lines of his face. He looked older in that light. He looked tired. George, I said. My voice sounded thin, like a piece of old silk pulling apart at the seams. George, I need you to look at me. He didn't look up. He kept staring at the statement. I felt a flash of heat rise in my neck. It was anger, but underneath the anger, there was a deep, hollow fear. A fear that my life was not what I thought it was. I saw the withdrawals, I whispered. I had to say it twice because the first time was too quiet. I saw the dates. Every second. Tuesday. $500 here. $600 there. Totaling $3,000. I waited for him to make an excuse. I expected him to say he had invested it, or maybe that he had a gambling problem I never knew about. I even braced myself for him to tell me he was sick and was paying for doctors I didn't know. But he stayed silent. Who is she, George? I finally asked. The question felt like a stone in my throat. Who is the person you are giving our life savings to? I thought about the names I had seen in my nightmares over the past week. Was it someone from the golf club? Was it a woman from his past? I imagined a younger woman, someone who didn't have grey hair and aching joints. I felt a sob building up, but I pushed it down. I wanted the truth. I deserved the truth after 40 years. Is she someone I know? I asked again. My heart was beating so fast. It was a frantic drumming in my ears. I told myself to breathe. Just breathe, Martha. One breath at a time. George finally moved. He pushed his coffee cup away. The sound of the ceramic sliding against the wood seemed incredibly loud in the silent house. He looked up at me then. His eyes weren't angry. They weren't even guilty. They were just full of a sadness that I couldn't understand. He didn't answer me directly. Instead, he reached out and touched the edge of the bank statement with his thumb. He traced the numbers. $3,000. He traced them over and over again. Martha, he said. His voice was husky. It is not what you think. It is not a woman. Not in the way you mean. I didn't believe him. How could I? The money was gone. He had been sneaking around. He had been lying to me by omission for months. Then what is it? I demanded. I felt my voice rising. Tell me where the money went. Tell me why you felt you had to hide this from me. We have never had secrets, George. Never. Not even when things were hard. Not even when we lost everything in the crash of 2008. We were a team. He sighed, a long, shaky breath that seemed to come from his very soul. He leaned back in his chair, and for a moment he looked like he was about to cry. George never cried, not since the day we stood in the rain at the cemetery. I wanted to tell you, he whispered, but I didn't know how. I didn't want to break the peace we finally found. I thought I could handle it on my own. I thought I could keep the secret just a little longer. He stood up slowly. His knees popped, a sound that usually made me smile. But now it just felt like a reminder of how much time had passed. He walked toward the living room, gesturing for me to follow. My heart was still racing, but the anger was being replaced by a cold, numbing confusion. I followed him into the dim light of the den, where the photos of our life lined the walls. We stood there, two old people surrounded by the ghosts of our past, waiting for the truth to come out under the yellow light. I am sitting on my front porch now. The sun is beginning to set over the oak trees, painting the sky in shades of orange and soft purple. I have a glass of cold iced tea in my hand. The ice cubes clink against the glass. It is a small sound, but in the quiet of the evening it feels like music. It has been several weeks since that day in the kitchen. Several weeks since I spoke those words out loud. Since then, the world has kept turning. The mailman still comes at 11 in the morning. The neighbor's dog still barks at the squirrels. But for me, everything has changed. George is staying with his brother now, over in the next county. We are moving through the legal steps, one day at a time. It is not easy. There are papers to sign and boxes to pack. Sometimes, I look at a space on the wall where a picture used to hang, and I feel a sharp pinch in my heart. But then, I take a breath, a long, deep breath, and I realize that the air feels lighter. People told me I was brave. My daughter called me from Chicago and cried. She said, "Mother, I do not know how you did it." She thought it was too late for someone my age to start over. She thought 51 years was too long to walk away from. But I told her, it is never too late to choose the truth. I think about that money, that $60,000. It is gone. I have to accept that. I have to change my plans for the future. I might not see the Pacific Ocean this year. I might have to be more careful with my grocery budget. But you know what? I realized something important. I am still here. I am 72 years old. And I am still standing. I have my health. I have my children. I have my dignity. Those are things that no one can steal from me, not even a man I trusted for 5 decades. To anyone listening to my story, I want you to know something. Life is a long road. It has many turns. Sometimes, the person walking beside you chooses a different path. It hurts. It feels like the end of the world. But it is not the end. It is just a new chapter. I am learning to enjoy the silence now. It is no longer a silence filled with secrets and lies. It is a silence filled with peace. I can wake up in the morning and know that I am living an honest life. I can look in the mirror and like the woman I see. The sun has finally dipped below the horizon. The first stars are starting to peek through the dark. I am going to go inside now. I am going to lock my door, turn on my favorite lamp, and read a book. I am Martha Benson. I am alone, but I am not lonely. I am whole. I am free. And for the first time in a very long time, I am looking forward to tomorrow. George didn't go to his desk. He didn't go to the safe. Instead, he walked over to the old bookshelf, the one that held all our family albums and the heavy leather-bound Bible. He reached behind a row of old novels and pulled out a small wooden box. It was a box I had seen 1,000 times, but I always thought it was just full of old coins or spare keys. He sat down on the sofa and patted the cushion next to him. I hesitated. I was still hurt. I was still shaking. But something in his posture, the way his shoulders slumped, made me sit down. I sat on the very edge, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. George opened the box. His hands were trembling. He reached inside and pulled out a photograph. It wasn't in a frame. It was loose, and the edges were frayed and yellowed with age. It looked like it had been carried in a wallet for a long, long time. He didn't give it to me right away. He looked at it first. He looked at it with such intensity, such longing, that it made my heart ache. Then, slowly, he handed it to me. I took it. My eyes adjusted to the dim light. It was a picture of a young girl. She was about 10 years old, with golden curls and a smile that could light up the darkest room. She was wearing a blue sundress, the one I had sewn for her 10th birthday. It was Emily, our daughter, our only child. The air left my lungs. It felt like someone had punched me. Emily had been gone for 15 years. 15 long, empty years since the accident. We didn't talk about her much anymore. Not because we didn't love her, but because the pain was like a wild animal that we had finally managed to lock in a cage. If we spoke her name too often, we were afraid the animal would break out and tear us apart again. "Why are you showing me this, George?" I asked. My voice was a whisper. I felt a tear slide down my cheek and land on the plastic coating of the photo. "You know how hard this is." "Why now?" George took a deep breath. He leaned his head back against the sofa and closed his eyes. "That money, Martha," he said. "The $3,000. It wasn't for another woman. It was for her. It was for Emily." I looked at the photo, then back at him. I was so confused. "What do you mean?" She is gone, George. How can money be for her?" He opened his eyes, and they were wet with tears. "It is not for her directly. It is for her legacy. Do you remember what she wanted to be? Before the accident?" I nodded. "A teacher. She wanted to help children who had nothing. She used to talk about opening a school in the city." George nodded. "Last year, I found out about a small community center in the old neighborhood. The one near where we used to live. They were going to close down their after-school program because they didn't have the funds. They needed repairs. They needed books. They needed someone to care." He paused, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "I started going there on Tuesdays," he continued. "I told you I was going to the library or the hardware store. But I was there. I saw those kids, Martha. They remind me so much of her. They have that same spark, that same hope. I felt the anger in me begin to melt away, replaced by a profound sense of shame. I had spent weeks imagining the worst. I had imagined betrayal and lies, and all the while my husband was doing the most beautiful thing imaginable. "The $3,000, I said, the realization hitting me like a wave. "You were giving it to the center." "I bought them new computers," George said. "I paid for the roof to be patched. I bought a whole set of encyclopedias. I didn't want to tell you because I knew it was our savings. I knew it was the money we set aside for our cruise. I felt guilty for spending our retirement on a dream that belonged to a girl who isn't here anymore." He looked at me, his face full of worry. "I am so sorry, Martha. I should have asked you. I should have shared it with you. I just wanted to keep her alive in some small way. I wanted to feel like she was still making a difference in this world. I looked down at the photo of Emily. Her blue eyes seemed to be looking right at me. I thought about the $3,000. It was just money. It was just paper and ink. But what George had done with it, that was love. That was a father's love that stretched across the veil of death. I reached out and took George's hand. His skin was dry and papery, but his grip was strong. "Oh, George," I said. I let the tears flow then. I didn't try to stop them. "You foolish, wonderful man. You aren't mad?" he asked. He sounded like a young boy, hopeful and scared all at once. "I am mad that you did it alone," I told him. I squeezed his hand. "I am mad that you didn't let me help. I miss her too, George. Every single day. I want to go with you next Tuesday. I want to see the computers. I want to see the kids." George smiled then. It was the first real smile I had seen on his face in months. It was a smile that reached his eyes and cleared away the shadows of the yellow light. "They would love to meet you," he said. "They really would." We sat there for a long time in silence. But it wasn't the heavy, stormy silence from before. It was a quiet peace. We looked at the old, torn photograph together. We remembered the sound of Emily's laughter. We remembered the way she used to run through the sprinklers in the backyard. The $3,000 was gone. Our cruise would have to wait. But as I sat there with my husband, I realized we had found something much more valuable. We had found a way to bring our daughter back into our lives. We had found a way to turn our grief into something that could grow and bloom in the hearts of others. The yellow light didn't seem so harsh anymore. It felt warm. It felt like home. And for the first time in 15 years, when I thought of Emily, the pain didn't tear me apart. It just felt like a soft, steady heartbeat. A legacy. Her legacy. Our legacy. "Next Tuesday," I whispered. "Next Tuesday," George replied. And together, we put the photograph back in the wooden box, knowing that the secret was finally out and the healing could finally begin. The silence in our living room was no longer cold. It was warm, like the glow from the fireplace on a snowy Michigan evening. I looked at George. Really looked at him. I saw the calluses on his fingers. I saw the way he rubbed his lower back when he thought I wasn't watching. For months, I thought those were just signs of him getting older. I thought he was just spending more time in his workshop out in the garage, tinkering with old clocks or fixing broken chairs for the neighbors. But now, I realized those marks on his hands were stories. They were stories of hard work that he had kept hidden from me. I asked him softly how he had managed to find $3,000. We lived on a fixed income. We had our social security checks and a small pension from his years at the engineering firm. Every penny was accounted for in my leather-bound ledger. I knew where every dollar went, or at least, I thought I did. George took a slow sip of his coffee. He looked toward the window, watching the fireflies dancing in the dark yard. He told me that he hadn't touched our joint savings. Not a single cent of our retirement fund had been spent. My heart skipped a beat. If the money didn't come from our accounts, where did it come from? He began to explain. He told me about a man named Mr. Henderson. Mr. Henderson owned a small manufacturing plant 2 towns over. It was an old-fashioned place that struggled with modern machinery. Apparently, George had been driving over there 3 days a week. While I was at my gardening club, or visiting with the ladies at the church, George was back in the world of blueprints and grease. He was acting as a consultant. He was fixing problems that younger engineers couldn't figure out. He told me about the long hours. He described the smell of the machine shop, the scent of ozone and hot metal. He said it made him feel useful again. But he wasn't doing it for the thrill of the work. He was doing it for a very specific reason. He reminded me of the day Emily graduated from high school. She was the valedictorian. She stood on that stage in her red cap and gown, looking so bright and full of life. She had been accepted into the pre-med program at the university. She wanted to be a doctor. She wanted to heal people. She had such a big, beautiful heart. When we lost her, that dream died too. or so I thought. George told me that he couldn't stop thinking about that dream. He said it kept him awake at night. He felt that since Emily never got to wear a white doctor's coat, someone else should. Someone who had the talent but didn't have the money. He wanted to build a bridge for another child. A bridge made of his own hard work. He said he didn't want to use our nest egg. He told me that our retirement money was for our peace and our safety. He didn't want me to feel the pinch of his ambition. He wanted this gift to be a pure sacrifice. His own labor, his own time, his own tired bones. I sat there, feeling a deep sense of humbleness. I thought about all the times I had complained about him being late for dinner. I thought about the times I had scolded him for having grease under his fingernails. I didn't know he was building a legacy in the shadows. He told me about the small technical manuals he had been writing for the company. He had been staying up late, long after I had gone to sleep. He worked by the light of a small desk lamp in the garage. He wrote and he calculated. Every hour of work was another $50. Every $50 was another book for a student. Another lab fee paid. Another step toward a goal I couldn't yet see. It was so typical of George. He was a man of action, not a man of many words. He didn't want praise. He didn't want a pat on the back. He just wanted to fulfill a promise he had made to his daughter in his heart. I looked at his hands again. They were the hands of a man who had built our home. They were the hands that held me when we got the news about the accident. And now, they were the hands that were working to make sure Emily's dream didn't stay buried in the ground. I reached over and took his hand. I brought it to my lips and kissed the rough skin. I told him he was the best man I had ever known. I told him I was sorry for doubting him. I was sorry for letting my imagination run wild with ugly thoughts. He just smiled that gentle, tired smile. He said he understood. He said that secrets are heavy things to carry. He told me he felt lighter now that I knew. He said he missed her so much it felt like a physical ache in his chest. And working for her, it made the ache a little easier to bear. We sat there for a long time. The night grew deeper. The house was still. But for the first time in 15 years, it didn't feel like a house of mourning. It felt like a house of purpose. George was no longer just a retired engineer. He was a man on a mission. And I knew right then and there that I was going to stand right beside him. The next morning, the sun felt warmer. The coffee smelled better. It was as if a heavy curtain had been pulled back, letting the light into the dusty corners of our marriage. George and I sat on the back porch, watching the robins hunt for worms in the grass. We were quiet, but it was a comfortable silence. It was the silence of two people who finally understood one another. But there was still more to the story. George hadn't just been working for a few $1,000s. There was a bigger number. A much bigger number. He leaned back in his wicker chair. He took a deep breath of the morning air, scented with pine and damp earth. He began to talk about the future. He spoke about a vision he had. He called it the Emily Grace Scholarship Fund. He told me that his goal was not just to help one student for 1 year. He wanted something that would last forever. He wanted a permanent endowment at the local university. To do that, he needed to reach a specific amount. He needed $75,000. I nearly dropped my mug. $75,000. It was a staggering amount. To us, that was a small fortune. It was enough to buy a small house in some parts of the country. It was more money than we had ever seen at one time. He explained that $75,000 was the minimum required to create a self-sustaining scholarship. The interest from that money would pay for a student's tuition every single year, forever. Long after he and I were gone, long after our house was sold and our names were forgotten, Emily's name would live on. Every year, a young man or a young woman would receive a letter. The letter would tell them that their dreams were being funded by Emily Grace. He told me he had been working toward this for 5 years. 5 years of secret consulting. 5 years of small side jobs. 5 years of saving every extra penny. He had already reached $40,000. The $3,000 I had seen on the statement was just the most recent deposit into the special investment account. I asked him why he had kept such a beautiful thing a secret. I asked him why he didn't let me celebrate with him. Why let me worry? Why let me feel like he was pulling away? George looked at me, and his eyes were filled with a tenderness that made me want to weep. He told me that he did it to protect me. He said that every time he looked at the paperwork, he saw Emily's name. He saw the words, death certificate, in his mind right next to the words scholarship fund. He knew how much I struggled. He knew that I had spent years trying to find a way to live without the constant shadow of grief. He told me he was afraid. He was afraid that if I saw her name on bank statements every month, it would be a fresh wound. He was afraid that seeing the financial value of her legacy would feel cold to me. He wanted to wait until he had the full $75,000. He wanted to walk into the kitchen one morning and hand me the completed certificate. He wanted to give me a finished gift, a beautiful, perfect tribute that was already done. He didn't want me to see the struggle. He didn't want me to see the slow, painful process of building it. He just wanted me to see the love. I felt a lump in my throat. I thought about all those times I had seen him looking at his ledger with a furrowed brow. I thought he was worried about our bills. I thought he was stressed about the rising cost of heating the house or the price of groceries. I never realized he was calculating the price of a dream. He called it his chapel of love. He said that some men build grand cathedrals out of stone and stained glass. But he didn't have stones. He had his skills. He had his time. He had a love for his daughter. So, he was building this fund, dollar by dollar, like a mason laying bricks. I told him that he was wrong about one thing. I told him that I wasn't fragile. I told him that seeing her name didn't just bring pain, it brought pride. I wanted to be a part of the building process. I didn't want the finished cathedral. I wanted to help carry the bricks. I suggested we sell the old boat in the garage that we never used. I told him we could skip our anniversary dinner at the steakhouse and have a picnic in the park instead. I told him we could find ways to save together. George's eyes brightened. It was like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He didn't have to carry the $75,000 burden alone anymore. He had a partner. We spent the rest of the morning talking about the students we would help. We talked about the kind of person Emily was. We laughed about the time she tried to bandage the neighbor's dog with a whole roll of toilet paper because he had a tiny scratch on his paw. She was a healer from the very start. I realized then that George hadn't betrayed our marriage. He had deepened it. He had taken our greatest tragedy and turned it into a mission. He had shown me that love isn't just about holding hands while you walk through the park. Love is about working in the dark to create light for someone else. We decided together that we would reach that goal of $75,000. We would do it together. We would look at the statements together. We would say her name together. As the sun rose higher in the sky, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in 15 years. The secret was gone. The fear was gone. All that was left was the work. The beautiful, quiet work of love. I looked at my husband, my George. He was a man of 70 years. But in that moment, he looked as strong as a giant. We had a goal. We had a legacy. And most importantly, we had each other. The journey to $75,000 was still long. We had $35,000 more to go. But I wasn't worried. We had plenty of time. We had plenty of love. And we had the memory of a girl in a blue sundress to guide us home. I sat there in the quiet of our living room, listening to the steady tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. It was a sound I had heard every day for 30 years, but tonight it sounded different. It didn't sound like time slipping away. It sounded like a heartbeat. A slow, steady heartbeat that held our home together. I looked down at my hands, resting in my lap. I felt a deep, heavy sense of shame. It was a weight in my chest, more painful than the suspicion I had carried for weeks. How could I have been so wrong? I had spent 40 years building a life with George. We had shared meals and laughter and the deepest kind of sorrow. And yet, at the first sign of a secret, I let my mind wander into the dark. I had let myself believe that he was capable of betraying me. I had looked at my husband, a man of honor and quiet strength, and I had seen a stranger. I was wrong. I was so wrong. The word echoed in my mind. Wrong. It was a bitter pill to swallow. I had acted like a detective, searching for clues of an affair when I should have been a partner, searching for the heart of my husband. I had felt like a victim of a lie. But the truth was, George wasn't lying to hurt me. He was lying to protect the fragile peace I had spent 15 years trying to find. He was carrying the burden of our daughter's dream all by himself, just so I wouldn't have to feel the sting of her absence every time I looked at a bank statement. I felt a warm hand cover mine. George was leaning toward me. His eyes were soft, filled with a light that I had almost forgotten. He didn't look at me with judgment. He didn't look at me with anger for doubting him. He just looked at me with love. He told me, in that low, rumbling voice of his, that it was okay. He said he understood why I was scared. He told me that when we lose something as precious as a child, the world starts to feel like a dangerous place. He said that fear makes us see shadows where there is only light. Martha, he whispered, I have loved you since the day I saw you at the county fair. I have loved you through the good years and the lean years. I have loved you when we were young and dancing, and I love you now, when our bones ache and the world moves too fast. He squeezed my hand. It was a firm, steady squeeze. It was the grip of a man who wasn't going anywhere. I am sorry I kept it from you, he said. I thought I was being strong. I thought I was being a good husband by keeping the sorrow out of our house. But I see now that I was just keeping you out of a part of my heart. I won't do that again. I couldn't help it then. The tears that had been gathering behind my eyes for weeks finally broke free. They weren't the hot, angry tears of a woman who had been cheated on. They were the cold, cleansing tears of a woman who had been saved. I leaned my head against his shoulder. He smelled like old wood and the peppermint candy he always kept in his pocket. It was the smell of safety. It was the smell of my life. We started to talk about Emily. Not the way we used to, in hushed tones as if we were afraid to wake the ghost of her. We talked about her properly. We talked about her laugh, which sounded like silver bells. We talked about the way she used to insist on wearing her rain boots even when the sun was shining. For 15 years, we had been walking around the hole she left in our lives. We had been careful not to fall in, but tonight we stood at the edge of that hole together, and we realized it wasn't a dark pit anymore. George had been filling it, day by day, dollar by dollar, with something good. He had been filling it with hope for other children. We cried together then. We sat on that old sofa, two people who had seen 70 winters, and we let the grief wash over us. We cried for the wedding Emily never had. We cried for the grandchildren we would never hold. We cried for the 15 years of silence we had kept between us. But as we cried, I felt something shifting inside me. The pain was still there, but the sharpness was gone. It was being smoothed over by the knowledge that her life still mattered. Her name, Emily Grace, would be whispered in the halls of a university. It would be written on diplomas. It would be a light for a student who was struggling to find their way, just like we had been struggling. George reached into his pocket and pulled out a clean handkerchief. He dried my eyes with a tenderness that made my heart swell. He told me that he had already spoken to the bank. He said that starting next month, the account would be in both our Taines. He said we would go to the community centre together every Tuesday. We are a team, Martha, he said. We always have been. From now on, we build this legacy together. I looked around our living room. The yellow light from the lamp seemed to reach every corner now. There were no more shadows. There were no more secrets. There was just us. I realized that this was the salvation of faith. It wasn't just about believing in something bigger than ourselves. It was about having faith in each other. It was about believing that even in the darkest parts of our lives, love is working beneath the surface. Love is consulting on blueprints. Love is fixing broken machines. Love is saving every penny to make a dream come true. I felt a peace that passes all understanding. It was a quiet, deep satisfaction. I knew that the road ahead wouldn't always be easy. We were getting older, and the world was still a complicated place. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I took a deep breath. The air felt clear. I looked at my husband, my George, and I saw him for who he truly was. He was my rock. He was my partner. He was the keeper of our daughter's flame. I love you, George, I said. He leaned over and kissed my forehead. I love you too, Martha. Always. We sat there for a long time, watching the moon rise over the trees. We were two old people, with a torn photograph and a bank statement. But we were the richest people in the world. We had found our way back to each other. We had turned our mourning into a mission. And in the quiet of that Thursday night, our hearts were finally, truly, healed. The $75,000 didn't seem like a mountain anymore. It seemed like a path, and we were going to walk it, hand in hand, until we reached the end. Everything was going to be all right. I knew it in my soul. I knew it because for the first time in a long, long time, when I closed my eyes, I didn't see the accident. I saw Emily, and she was smiling. She was proud of us, and that was all the salvation I ever needed.